We are live on Facebook. Okay.
Welcome to Get Justice with Scott Elliot Smith and Michael Morris. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Scott. I'm glad you're here today. We've got an exciting one.
Well, we have a special guest, and before I introduce him, I want to talk a little bit about how he fits into what we do. Anybody that's listened to the show knows I do personal injury litigation. Trucking, car, motorcycle, you name it, that's what we do. We limit our practice to that. But the topic today is going to involve what you do with your money if and when you settle. Most cases settle. About 95% of cases I have, Michael, settle. So what happens is a lot of times our clients are given a net amount of money that is very large. And what they want to do is keep it. And that's what I tell them to do. Try to keep that money. Try to invest it. So a lot of the clients will ask for advice on what to do with the money, and I tell them to find a financial consultant, stockbroker, something of that nature. Well, sometimes they do that, and sometimes they don't. But be that as it may, when they invest with a stockbroker, sometimes things don't go the way they should. And today with us is David Meyer. He's an attorney in Columbus, Ohio, probably one of the foremost security lawyers in the country. And David's here to talk to us a little bit about what happens when your stockbroker doesn't take care of you like he should. Hi, David. How are you?
I'm great, Scott. Good to be here.
David, tell us a little bit about what you do.
So you're right. I'm an investment fraud lawyer. I help people whose stockbrokers and financial advisors lies, cheats, or steals from them. And let me say that for the most part, most financial professionals in this business do right by their clients. They're diligent. They recommend and implement an appropriate investment strategy for their clients. But unfortunately, there are too many of them that don't do what they're supposed to do. So my role as an investment fraud lawyer, I see it as a two-part role. I do a lot of speaking to retirees and investment groups and things like this to get the word out, to try to educate people on what to do to minimize the chance they ever have a problem. I mean, my best case scenario is no one ever has to call me, because if they never get into problems, then they don't need a lawyer like me. But sometimes bad things happen to good people, and if their financial advisor lies, cheats, or steals, then that's where I come in to try to recover those investment losses. But there are a lot of basic things that people can do, and I do get a lot of, I know there are a lot of individual investors who receive a lump sum money from a personal injury claim, maybe an inheritance, and they don't have any experience with that. They might be the first time they've seen a large chunk of money, so they don't have just somewhere to automatically go. They don't have a whole school of investment advisors working for them like the uber wealthy do. So they need help. So they go online, they look for an investment advisor. And if you type in, financial advisor Columbus, Ohio, you're going to get hundreds of pages of folks, and it's hard to sift through that to figure out, who might be someone they can work with. So there's a couple things that everyone should do, and this is whether or not you come into some money and you don't have an investment advisor, or if you have a financial advisor right now, as many of us do, then this is something you can do right now online when the show is over, and spend 10 minutes on Google, and you can protect yourself that way. So a couple things. The first thing you should do when you call people, and get referrals like anything else. If you're looking for a dentist or a lawyer or an accountant, a lot of people just call some friends. So look to people you trust and that you love, and say, who are you working with? Do you have a financial advisor that you like, that you trust? So you get a couple names, and then sit down and meet them. I am amazed on how many people contact my office every week who have invested their life savings with a financial advisor whom they've never met. Because a lot of financial advisors around the country will cold call. So they smile and dial, and they get people, and typically they target retirees, people who may be living alone, who may like someone to talk to. So oftentimes people, maybe elderly people more than anyone, will just hand over their life savings to people they've never met. So what I say is, make sure you meet the person face to face. Go to their office. Make sure they have an office. If they don't have an office, or have a really dumpy office, is that someone that you really want to entrust your life savings to? And that doesn't take a lot of time and effort. And then ask them, are you employed by a brokerage firm? Because you cannot sell investments or securities unless you're licensed or registered. And there's a whole lot of detail behind all this, but there's some basic questions you need to ask. Hey, first of all, do you have an office? Where do you work? Whom do you work for? Do you work for a brokerage firm? And if they work for a brokerage firm, then you could go online right then and get their, it's called a CRD report. It's basically it's an electronic report that details the employment history, the disciplinary history, the license history of everybody. And I will tell you, I know you can't do that for lawyers. I don't think you can do that for doctors. If you want to look to see if any lawyer that you may be hiring has ever been named in a lawsuit, I don't think that's information that's publicly available. And certainly I don't think that's so for doctors. So the financial services industry is highly regulated. So it's great news that all of us, before we hire a financial advisor, we can go online and look up their records. So you need to get their CRD number. CRD stands for Central Registration Depository. All you need to know is you go to brokercheck.org. Brokercheck.org, and it's an easy-to-use online system. You can do it in your pajamas, and you can go and you type in the name, the CRD number, and the employer if you know it, and it pulls up the name of your broker, where they've worked, where they work now, if there's ever been any disciplinary history, if there's ever been any complaints filed by customers of them who have hired lawyers like me, and you can do all that in the comfort of your own home. And you might see that the person might have 5 or 10 complaints, or they might have been disbarred and not permitted to sell securities. You obviously don't want to work for anyone who no longer has a license. But I get calls all the time from folks who invested with somebody who is no longer licensed. In fact, we can talk about this, but there's a criminal indictment filed just last week against an unlicensed advisor who works not too far from this studio, who just got indicted criminally for selling securities without a license. And if anyone would have looked before then, before investing, they would have seen that that person wasn't licensed. So that's the first thing they need to do is after you go to their office, you find out where they work, and you pull their CRD report and find out their history.
David, well, you take a breath there. Thank you for that great information.
I'm glad that David's here, but I want him to come out of his shell, and I want him to be excited about what he's talking about. And if you could just do that the next time you're talking, that would be fantastic.
Well, I've been doing this every day for 20 years.
It's hard to tell.
When I get these calls from people who have lost their life savings, I mean, every Monday morning when I come to work, I say to everyone in my office, there's no way we're going to receive a call as devastating and heartbreaking as we did last week, and we do. So whatever I can do, and anyone that will listen and let me talk to them about things they can do to prevent this from happening, then all the better.
Well, David, tell us about you've got your financial advisor and you've invested your money, and turns out he or she has lied, cheated, or stolen. And most people don't know that there are lawyers like you out there. So I imagine they have to Google and find you, and I'm sure you're available if they Google you. And they come to you. What can you do for them?
Well, so there is a process to recover losses caused by investment fraud. But let me take a step back, because there are things you can do to minimize the chance that even if you're with somebody who may have a bad history and you don't know it, before you incur those losses, there are some red flags. And so if you know these red flags, maybe you can avoid even becoming a victim of investment fraud and not having to call a lawyer like me. You need to make sure you get monthly statements. If you've invested money, you need to get account statements. And those account statements need to come from a legitimate company. They shouldn't come from John Doe Investments out of the back of a garage. They need to have a brokerage firm or what's called a clearing firm name that you should recognize. And you can do a little bit of research about that. You need to have monthly statements. They need to make sense. I'm not saying that if you have a 15-page statement that you have to understand every purchase, every trade, every dividend. Most people, when they get their statement, they look at the top left. They see a graph of money going up or money going down. But you need to do basically a fly speck through the statement and make sure you understand what you have. If you're getting a flurry of confirmations, when a stock or a security is bought and sold, you get what used to be you get in the mail, now you get via email. If you're getting stacks and stacks of what are called trade confirmations, that's probably silly, and it's probably not in your best interest. If you're having trouble getting a hold of your broker, if you call them and they don't call you back, those are things to raise a red flag. So those are some examples of some things that you can look out for. Make sure you understand what's in your account. Make sure you're working with a real brokerage firm, because I will tell you, the number one problem with people that call me that have lost money as a result of investment fraud, they happen to be working with either an unregistered broker or they work with a brokerage firm, unbeknownst to them, that's tiny, that doesn't have any money. So even if they have a great claim on liability, that I may not be able to help them because the brokerage firm may be too small. So there are plenty of great financial advisors that work for large companies, the Merrill Lynch's, the Raymond James, the LPLs, and there's many of them, but there are hundreds and hundreds of brokerage firms that are so tiny. Could you imagine investing your life savings with a brokerage firm that might only have like $20,000 extra in their pocket, in their bank account to pay for claims? There's no requirement in the securities industries that these brokerage firms have insurance. So a brokerage firm or a broker could be managing millions of dollars of client money and have no insurance. And guys like me, lawyers like me, are trying to fix that. And most people think that, oh, the statement says they're a member of SIPC, S-I-P-C. SIPC does not provide any coverage or insurance for bad investment advice. The coverage of SIPC that everybody sees on their statements, on the websites, gives, in my opinion, gives investors a false sense of protection. I have never, ever, in 1,000 cases I've handled, ever had my clients recover money from the SIPC government fund. So again, those are things to watch out for. But if, unfortunately, you become a victim of investment fraud, the first thing to understand is, what I see a lot in my practice is people internalize it. They blame themselves. I should have known better. I should have known that this broker had a bad history, or I should have known that these investments were inappropriate. Most folks who hire a full-service broker to entrust them with their life savings, they don't have the experience, they don't have the background. They may have worked at a factory for 30 years. They may have just come in a personal injury settlement and have no finance background. We trust our professionals to do their job. When I go to my accountant, I don't really know what he's doing to do my taxes. I trust that my tax returns are right. I trust when my doctor says, take this white pill and you're going to need this surgery, then I believe him. And so we trust. Life's complicated, right? There's a lot of things going on, and we trust people that appear to have the experience and the expertise. And there's nothing wrong with trusting people with your money who have the supposed expertise to do it. So you need to understand that if you suffer losses, if you believe there's something wrong in your account, you should contact a securities fraud lawyer. And it's different. The one thing most people don't know about this business is if you have a problem with the stockbroker, you cannot go to your local courthouse and file a lawsuit. Because when all of us, and most people don't know this, but when all of us open an account with a brokerage firm, there's some new account documents. And it's probably like 10 pages, and people don't read the back because it's small print. But one of those paragraphs on page 7 in the back in very fine print says that by opening the account, you agree to forego any potential lawsuit in court if you have any problems, and you agree to pursue your claim through mandatory arbitration. And that's what I am. I'm an arbitration securities fraud lawyer. So you need to understand you're not going to go to court. You're not going to hire a court lawyer. You're going to have to hire a securities, we call it a FINRA arbitration lawyer. And then that process is similar to a lawsuit, but it doesn't go to court. Most lawyers that do what I do take cases on a contingency fee like you do, Scott, advance expenses. And most consultations obviously are free. So if you have a concern, call an experienced securities fraud lawyer and see if there's misconduct. Not all losses in investments are as a result of misconduct. Stocks go up and down, investments go up and down. But your advisor is required to recommend and implement an appropriate investment strategy for you. And if he or she does not, and you suffer losses, you may have a claim to pursue in mandatory FINRA arbitration.
That's fantastic information, David. Michael, you were about ready to say something. You're chomping at the bit over there.
Well, there were two things that you said that sparked. I want to just pick one for now. The teacher's pension fund, which just came up within the last 18 months. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but all these teachers thought they were paying into a fund. How do they go about getting taken care of? Because I have to know that you exist, right? First of all. And then it's not one person, it's thousands of teachers have been paying into this fund that somebody has squandered their retirement. Now what happens? Is it you have to handle one person, you can handle 20 people? How does that work?
Well, pensions are much different. The PERS and STRS, that's kind of a whole different animal, because people have a lot of questions about that relating to fees and expenses. And I mean, I know my wife was a teacher for a long time. Her parents are now both retired teachers, and they have a lot of questions about their benefits change. There's all kinds of things that go on there. And that's really quite a different area when you're looking at pension funds. ERISA comes into play. But it is true, to your point, that there can be some problems that affect a lot of people, and the potential option for a class action lawsuit is out there. But most of the time, in my experience with people that call me, and we get calls from members of the public employees retirement system. Usually they're questions that it's complicated, and they just don't understand what they're getting. They don't understand the nature of any changes. And what I have found is the folks over there at PRS and STRS, if you call over there, they're very good about walking through and answering those questions. But to your point, though, there is a potential, I mean, outside of just that particular question, if there are members of pension funds who believe that the folks that are charged with a fiduciary duty to properly manage that fund, if there's a problem, there is an option for a class action lawsuit, and that is actually outside of the arbitration process.
Well, part two of that was, Scott and I talk about this all the time, because one of my favorite things to watch is The Big Short. I've watched that 100,000 times. I'm sure you've seen that.
I have.
So when I'm learning about tranches and all these other things, I'm looking at this and saying, you're buying bad stock, and you know you're buying it. It's hot potato, who has it last. How did those people get compensation that lost everything? I mean, they're putting everything in. They're saying, we're going to guarantee these returns. Now they've lost it, and the economy slides.
So that's the subprime nightmare. And I think the best way to address that is to make sure people understand that 99% of us don't need to ever have to deal with any of that stuff. There's no reason any of us, 99% of America, needs to be buying tranches of subprime loans, these sophisticated hedge fund products. Most of us should have a well-diversified portfolio of stocks, mutual funds, ETFs. We don't need to be getting into illiquid real estate investment trusts, tenants in common. I mean, all those kind of complicated products are usually very illiquid, very expensive, and very risky. With respect to the subprime mess, how that affected most Americans is not because they were buying and selling these tranches of subprime mortgages that were full of junk mortgages that were given AAA ratings because the rating agencies were paid. I mean, that's all Wall Street gobbledygook that doesn't directly impact most of us. But how it impacts us is two ways. One is a lot of folks were stuck with homes they couldn't afford with really bad mortgages, and then when the market dropped out of the housing market, then a lot of us were stuck with homes that weren't worth anything near what we paid for them.
Or multiple homes.
Yeah, right. Or yeah, certainly. And also, though, with respect to individual retirement accounts and investments, in the summer of 2007, the stock market was just below 14,000, the Dow Jones Industrial Index. There's several different market indexes. The Dow Jones was just under 14,000 the summer of 2007. That subprime market collapsed, and between the summer of 2007 and March of 2009, the stock market cut in half, 50%. So folks that were heavily invested in the market some of them lost 50% or more of their investments. Now, if you're 30 years old and you understand the risk associated with the stock market and you understood the nature of the investment you had and you took a loss like that, so be it. It's fine. But if you're 50, 60, 70 or older and you are on a limited income, you don't have the time to make back money through working additional years, and you thought you were protected, you thought you had a safe portfolio, those are the folks that really got taken in that crash. And we were unfortunately ridiculously busy after that crash. Now look what's happened since then. March of 2009, the market's 7,000. It's almost at 22,000 as of this morning. So the stock market's tripled. So when most of us are looking at our IRAs or our retirement accounts, we're seeing green, right? Lots of green, lots of up. So a lot of us feel like, well, we must be really good at this, or our financial planner must be really good at this, and they may be, and you may be, but it's what I call the high tide effect. When the water's high, you can't see what's under it. So there may be some nice fish floating around under the high tide, or there might be some nasty sharks under there. And unfortunately, sometimes it's not until the tide goes down that the bad things are exposed. So my advice is, just because you see green and you see up and you see more money in your account than you did in the prior quarter, doesn't mean that everything is kosher. It just means that you're making money. So you still need to understand what's in your portfolio. You still need to look at those trade confirmations. You still need to look at those statements, because what comes up must go down. It's not going to go up forever.
All right, David, thank you. We're going to have to take a quick break. You've been listening to Get Justice with Scott Smith and Michael Morris, and our special guest today, David Meyer. After the break, there's a question I have got posed that you haven't answered yet, and I think everybody would like to hear the answer.
What's the question? What's the question? I didn't answer.
Well, we know all that. They screwed you, and they come to you. What do you do? What do you do?
This could be a two-part show.
Yeah, this could be.
Because my question is not only what do you do, how do they know to find you? I've never heard of what you do.
Well, he
The money
kind
I
of
spend in marketing.
touched on that. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you've done a lot of good marketing. But what I'm saying is, there are probably people out there that are listening there and go, I'm getting fucked over, and now there's somebody that can actually do
So
something.
they need to ask
They don't know people like you exist.
So yeah, they can ask their lawyer, they can ask their accountant, they can ask their what often people get pissed off or upset. They go to a new broker, and the new broker says, "Oh my God, you've really been taken." Call David Meyer. Go on the internet.
Well, let's do this. Well,
Yeah.
I'll go back on the break, and I'll welcome us back, and then I'll get into my question. And you just say, well, first of all, you have to be able to find it, and then you tell you to do it,
No.
and then you can say what you actually do, because we don't know what you do yet, other than you and I know.
right.
If
I mean,
Scott
you're
wants
using
to.
words.
Yeah, I'm not doing anything.
Using words a lot of people may not understand. Securities fraud. I'm
I don't
secure.
know.
I've got a gun. I'm secure. Okay.
Scott, do you want to do this in 2 shows while we've got him here? We have time, because I'm pretty sure he's going to fill the next 8 minutes, and we're going to have to ride this pony.
Well, I've got to be somewhere.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm just saying, but we can have him come back.
That's fine.
I'm gonna have a full head of hair next time.
God, that'd be amazing.
I don't know what you do with your wig like you normally do. All right.
I'll be taller. I'll be taller too.
Okay, yeah, we got about 6 more minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Do it.
Ready?
Yep.
Here we go.
Welcome back to Get Justice with Scott Elliot Smith and Michael Morris. Today we're joined by a special guest, David Meyer. David, before the break, I had a question that was posed you haven't quite got to yet. Now someone's been stolen from. They've been lied to. They find you. What do you do for them?
So as soon as folks call us, first thing we ask, we do what we recommend people do before they hire the broker. We go online, we look up the broker. Does the broker have prior complaints? Do they work for a firm that has the financial ability to pay a judgment if we're successful? If we find those 2 items to be true, then we get the account statements. We look through account statements. We want to see what was in the portfolio, how much money was deposited, how much money was withdrawn, what investments were purchased, what securities were purchased, and how did they perform, what the losses were. We do a loss analysis internally, and this is all complimentary. We don't charge for any of this. This is part of our pre-case evaluation. But if we believe at the end of our evaluation that we can recover money for those folks, then we offer representation on a contingency fee. We advance all the costs, all the expenses, and then we file an arbitration claim, which is similar to a lawsuit, but as I mentioned, it doesn't go to court. We file it with FINRA arbitration. We file a complaint against the brokerage firm for the losses suffered by the client, and we also request additional damages for attorney's fees, punitive damages if the case is appropriate, and then the case goes through the FINRA arbitration process. It's about a 12 to 15 month process, which from your experience, I know, Scott, you will say that's pretty quick. Most court cases these days take much longer. But similar to court cases, most of our cases settle prior to the final hearing. 90% of our cases usually settle within that 12 to 14 months. If it does go to a final hearing, which is similar to a trial, it's done in a conference room, it's done locally here in front of a panel of 3 arbitrators that the lawyers select through a selection process, a ranking process. We have a little trial. You have opening statements, you have direct examination, cross-examination, closing arguments, and then the arbitration panel within 30 days issues a final decision. The good news, if you win, about the FINRA arbitration process, most decisions are final and binding and non-appealable. So if you get an award against a brokerage firm and they have the ability to pay, you will get your money back within 30 days, or I can actually shut the firm down. I can actually shut the firm down if they don't pay, unless they file an appeal. But there's very narrow grounds for appeal. So these cases, 12 to 15 months through the FINRA arbitration process. The key, though, about this is this is a very narrow, specialized practice of the law, and there's not a lot of lawyers that practice investment fraud work against brokerage firms. So you need to do your diligence. And I suggest if you have a problem like this, you go through the same process I recommend for looking for a broker. Ask if you have a family lawyer or a personal injury lawyer, or you have an accountant, or you might have a new broker. If you're upset with your old broker, you go to a new one. Say, hey, I need an investment fraud lawyer. Do you have any recommendations? You can go online, but you just got to do your homework and make sure that just because somebody has a website that says they do this work, make sure they have experience of 10 and 20 years representing investors against brokerage firms, that get results and knows what they're doing.
Dave, we're running up to the end of the show, but before we leave, tell everyone how they can find you, maybe a website and a physical address.
So our website is www.investorclaims.com. That's investorclaims.com. My law firm name is Meyer Wilson, and we're at 1320 Dublin Road here in Columbus. We also have offices in Cleveland, Michigan, and Los Angeles, California.
That's great. David, thank you so much for being here today. Maybe we can have you back if you're so interested.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
You've been listening to you've been listening to Get Justice with Scott Elliot Smith and Michael Morris. Today, joined by David Meyer. I'll do that again.
Only if you want to. You don't have
You
to.
should do that.
I did that last time. I did that last time.
I heard it coming.
So
Nice.
before we get here, he's like, hey, just so you know, if you screw up, we can redo it. That's never happened before.
Yeah.
No, you're the
Just
one
that one
Yeah.
piece.
Sometimes when you do it
Is
again,
you've
it
been
sounds
listening to
unnatural
Welcome
and funny when I edit it in.
Well, you've been listening to Welcome to Get Justice.
No. And then you corrected yourself right away.
Okay, that's fine. We'll leave it that way.
Yeah.
That-
Unless
Two
if
weeks
you want to
ago,
do it
we got
again.
a streak.
Okay.
That's funny.
Let's get their video of the two of them.
Okay.